And we're back again with another episode of Angular Unfiltered. This is a special episode. All of them are special, but this one is dear to me, and dear to my guest co-host today. Also, this is going to be the NgRx edition. We got NgRx everything. We got NgRx branding, colors. Let's pop this logo up here. Bam, NgRx, NgRx, all the things. There you go. Yeah, I got my NgRx team member with me. Alex, go ahead and introduce yourself for the people who may not know who you are.
Hey, people who may not know me, I'm Alex Okrushko. I work at Google on Firebase Console, and I'm luckily part of the fantastic crew at NgRx as well, who's Brandon is part of as well. I'm organizer of Angular Toronto as well. We do our meetups every other month, and we continue to do them even despite the COVID and all that. That's about me.
Cool. So, like I said, this is all NgRx edition today that we're going to be talking about. I'll go ahead and add the homepage up here so we can, like I said, we mentioned release this week, NgRx version 10, new packages. We're not going to go through all the new stuff today. We had some NgRx conf updates. But yeah, the first one up in the list here is the NgRx ComponentStore package, which is what's going to be the focus of our this talk today, because we've been kind of churning. I think we've been churning on this one for a while before we actually released it. Went through a few iterations and definitely discussions there. And now it's out there for people to use, and I'm interested to see what people do with it, and to see how we'll get into it, but how like the mix between this and the global story is. But but I think that's a good place to start. Alex, if you want to kind of go into ComponentStore, we can talk about the backstory, or however you want to start off. Let's just dive right in.
Yeah. Hey, everybody in the chat there. I see Frosty here as well. See Zach. Hey. And this is something that I mentioned actually to Frosty like a long time ago, probably in January or whatever, that we were kind of we're looking into this component store thingy and more seriously, right? Because we did see the need. And yeah, you're right, Brendan. Like this release V10 was I think it came out very, very nicely, and we did take time to study the problem, to analyze it from different corners, to go over some of the potential use cases before we actually published it, and we also took a lot of feedback from community, which is great. And I'm actually quite happy the way before branding and it was prod ready or make it at 1.0. Actually, this one's 10.0 because we just trying to make it in sync with the rest of the NgRx package. But if it definitely, I feel like needed to be properly sorted. And the backstory of, for example, ComponentStore is internally at Firebase. We have a lot of discussions. We'll like our design reviews and stuff like that. So we go over anything that we do with the application itself, like Firebase console, which is Angular and uses NgRx, by the way. Nice. But we also go over, should we use these libraries? Should we do something? Hey, I have this kind of problem. What are the solutions for it? And things like that. Or somebody's like, hey, I like this, but I don't like this. Or how do I solve this? So we have a lot of discussions like that. ComponentStore was one of them. Kevin Yelko, who's also part of our team, was kind of struggling to not struggling. I said I didn't. I think probably the wrong word.
I would say back and forth. Like I would say with most teams, you start using NgRx and then you start using it everywhere. And like, well, should we be using this everywhere? And then like you said, you have those discussions back and forth about, well, like what are the other solutions or what other things can we do to not use it everywhere, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So like how would he, and he was working on a very complex component that needed to be in multiple places. So and moreover, it did need to interact with some of the network requests and stuff like that, and all wiring that up was problematic. And he's just like, hey, I just want to call my network API and get a result back, and wire it back into this component, and it doesn't have to be everywhere. So he started working this component store thing internally first. By the way, that's actually a second fairly large example that I think originated with Firebase Console initially. If you remember, for V8, the all these factory functions, exactly, started by Moshe Polodny, who's also like, hey, we can use TypeScript to do it a little bit better, right? Like, and he started this better NgRx kind of talk and then discussions, and that turned into more development. And then, when I talked to again a few people with especially like you and Tim, we discussed a lot of it.
Also, Nicholas Jameson can't leave Nicholas out. Definitely pioneered that previously.
Yeah, that's how we ran into through all those discussions. We ran into Nicholas Jameson library, and I'm like, Nicholas, where you were hiding this? He's like, well, I had the blog post about it like a long time ago, and that's how we basically adapted most of his TS action library into all those factory methods, and the board that turned out to be those create action, create reducer, and create effects in the end, which is fantastic. So ComponentStore started similar way. So Kevin started it initially, and been using for his kind of needs, right? And his needs was a shared component that could be reused in multiple places, right? And that sort of took over, and people like it, right? So he presented it a few times, and and that also was kind of I'm sure you too heard it many times, that this question is like, hey, I have this kind of state, and that state is self-contained in a way, and I want to have multiple instances of that. How do I solve with this in NgRx, right? So that was brought up many times already, and that's why Mike had this proposal like a long time ago, right, for the local state. I think at that point it's
been at least probably 2 years ago now when he initially opened that up. And I think it was that iteration of it was more or less a spin on creating APIs that would allow you to create local state, but it was, I guess, it was still more closely tied to the overall like global state. It was more like dynamic local state, I believe. And Tim wrote something up. Tim DeShriver, another team member, shout out to him, wrote something up pretty recently that was showing how you could use NgRx, the global store, like in a dynamic way and use it locally like that. So those two ideas were kind of similar in that way, as opposed to where we landed on ComponentStore being a separate thing altogether.
Exactly. And this is actually, if you remember, when I came back to this proposal with Kevin's solution originally, right? Like, hey, how close do we want it to be tied to the actual NgRx store? Right? So we were discussing some of that, and and then again, I was asking it to multiple people at different conferences as well, right? Like, hey, if we have this, how close do you want it to be to the actual NgRx store? Do you want it to be part of it? Do you want to see it in Redact DevTools? Do you want maybe it dispatched some of the actions underneath, maybe something that generated. And Frosty actually was one of the people who said, hey, I want it to be separate, right? I want it to be able to use by itself. And that was the overwhelming feedback was, hey, I want to have it, by itself, being standalone. And the other thing, like ComponentStore, was a one file thing. And it kind of still is. There's an additional operator that's internal to the ComponentStore, but still, a single file that's like under 300 lines of code, which is amazing. Right?
Yeah, and I think that's something that we've strived for throughout the lifetime of the project is like small APIs surface, not to throw all the tools at you at once and kind of let you build your own thing on top of the store, or like I said, on top of the component store now, just to have that flexibility there.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, so the component store, we kept it small. We squeezed in a few more APIs, I guess, to make it a little bit more flexible. But it's just such a great alternative for service with a subject that was one of the goals, right? So once we decided that we don't want it to be tied to the store, we want it to be independent, and we identified like which problems we want to be solving with them, right? And if you remember that design doc, which we get good feedback from as well, from community, from the team. You and Tim, I can't stress it enough that how much you and Tim actually helped this. It's like it was almost constant feedback that we were getting. Like I was getting from both of you while I was getting it into the NgRx platform. So thanks a lot for that.
Yeah, sure. Like I always have like some hesitation when I'm not actually writing the thing, but I always enjoy like collaborating and kind of like ironing out some of those details, because I try to take a look at it from like a user, like what is the developer gonna use this? So like what initial things are they gonna like run into that maybe we can try to iron those out now before they try to use them, and then we kind of have to modify like the APIs and things later. But yeah, those really, really, like I said, good discussions we had about just the APIs in general, or going through the iterations of which part should be in there, which part shouldn't. Because I think even we had it scoped down, or at least I did. I had it scoped down even more than what it is now, just because I wanted to take more of a hard stance on like imperative reads and things like that. Yeah. But like I said, going through the discussions from a like usage perspective, the things that we introduced made it so that it would be easier to do for like common use cases, which I think ultimately ended up for the better.
Yeah, and we're gonna get into the use cases just a little bit later today. Before I wanted to also sort of discuss the feedback loop and other things that went into it. Other things is I've been merging it back into the Google while in development, because we had already one solid use case that was quite popular within Firebase Console, which was this shared component that's kind of fairly independent that could be plugged anywhere. But then as we were developing, there were some other use cases, and I wanted to try a few of those before finalizing all the APIs and making it official package. And so luckily there was a feature within Firebase that overgoes some rewriting, and that although I don't contribute the code there, I do. It helped me overview how ComponentStore, propose an overview, and then review many of the PRs that we're developing with the ComponentStore. So it helped me understand some of the problems we were facing and basically bring back. That's how the debounds came about.
Mm-hmm.
And there was like, and then how to do it, how to actually do it, because some of the testing parts were a little bit harder. And I don't know if we'll get to the debunks today, but there's some of the actually we will. Yeah, well, so there's some of the this feedback also. It's not only like you creating. It's like recent article from Victor Safkin about the onion, and
Mm-hmm.
one of the point he says like you could be creating libraries and whatever you can do, that's fine, but you got to have that actual feedback loop for using it, right? And
Mm-hmm.
this is why we had it for a bit longer, for like 3 months. We've been using it for different use cases internally, and they actually helped change some of the APIs or flush them out as well, which is a good thing, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think or I know Google is the only place that does that, but we dog fooded it for a while, or it got dog fooded around before we actually released it. Because I think, well, Angular version 10, we even said up front, like when we were talking about it, like we don't want to release this as soon as 10 goes out, because we want to still have some more time to churn on the API and even try to get like the docs and stuff ready. Because that was one thing that I was really excited about, that we had a good set of docs, or even more docs coming, but we had a good set of docs up front for people to start using it and see what it was used for, and like in explanations and everything. So
Yeah, definitely. Docs are important. And as I put a few series while I was contributing this component store to the NgRx platform, the
mhm.
GitHub repo. I put a few series how I was
Yeah, you
contributing
did
them.
some YouTube, some late night YouTube streams. We were hanging out while you were actually putting it together. So if y'all haven't checked those out, we'll link those. But definitely go back and look and see. I use those as like co-reviews while I'm sitting on the couch, because you kind of went through all the parts, and I could see where you were trying to go with it, and try to or look at it that way. So definitely made the reviews easier. It was definitely something different, but I enjoyed the process.
Yeah, and API since then has definitely changed a little bit. But the important part was we were getting all the tests at the same time. So that was a good part. And
Mm-hmm.
but the docs were added a little bit later. I wanted to have the whole thing stable, because writing docs is unlike writing tests, I
Mm-hmm.
think. So once we have everything stable, then I got to the docs part. Anyhow, yeah. So what do we want to do? We want to start with the some of the component store versus the actual store thing, or do you want to go over some of the usage first?
Let's talk about I think that's probably going to be the biggest question up front, is like, should I use, basically, which one should I use? Because I think there's going to be a subset of people who maybe only use Component Store, I think. And I think there are some people that are going to use Component Store like a global store. But
Yeah,
we'll have to see. But yeah, I think at least talking about like what the difference in store versus Component Store would be a good place to start.
yeah, definitely. And I actually put some of the comparison in the, like, we have it in the official docs now,
Mm-hmm.
and we can show that as well, right? If
Yeah,
you
let's see if
can
we can
do
bring it
that.
up
Yeah,
here.
there you go. There
There
you
we
go.
go.
Awesome. Because I knew this would be a big question, and you also warned me up front, like, hey, we would need to have this kind of section,
Mm-hmm.
because people would have questions, and if you have one state management libraries and now you have two state management libraries, you definitely need to, and I 100% agree, you definitely need to compare or explain why there's two, and what's the difference between them,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah,
And
because even when also in our discussions, we talked about like, if we were to bake it in with the NgRx store package, I think some people just immediately upfront was like, nope, not using it. It's got to be tied to, it must be tied to Redux some kind of way. I don't like Redux actions. I don't like all the mechanics. I want something simpler. So making it, like I said, that was also part of making it like standalone, so that way we could clearly say that it was not part of the this global store itself.
Yeah, it was actually, yeah, that's a good point. Even when I was announcing it in different channels, in different discords, different places, some of the feedback was like, "Hey, I'm not actually using NgRx,"
Mm-hmm.
and somebody's like, I don't like the actions and whatever." I'm like, "Great, that's fine. This one doesn't have it, right?" Or something like that. It's like, take a look, right? Actually, I had the one conversation that. I probably heard 5 responses why they don't like NgRx in general before I actually said, "Hey, this is a different library. Look at it, right? Take a look at it." And it's like, "Oh, but I don't like actions." I'm like, no, this is different. Take a look at it. And go through the
It's
docs.
like, but it has, and I think because we can get into this real quick, I think that's part of how we've evolved, or we've tried to like evolve away from uh, NGRX and like NGRX store, because usually we say NGRX and that means the store and effects and everything else. Even though we were more specifically talking about that, and Mike talked about this at NGConf about how we were going back to where we were previously, where we weren't just about state management in general. We still have libraries that do that, or do that in different ways, but in general, we have always been about reactive libraries for Angular, and kind of building on that idea. So we tried to like pivot away from saying NgRx is the store and the actions and reducers and everything that goes with that, and more or less focus on, if you want to use NgRx store like for a global need, then that's where you bring in like the indirection and the actions and things. So like I said, more clear separation.
And initially we had NgRx is a collection of libraries dealing with state management. But now it's just, I think, go and say NgRx is a collection of libraries that help some of the reactivity with Angular applications, right? So it's not only state and stuff like that. Yeah, but with the component store, there's a lot of discussions about, hey, do I need a state management, or should I just stick with pure Angular services because I can have my behavior subject? And there was some conversation about that. That's all I need, right? And in some cases, that's probably true. And I wanted to touch on those points. And the component store is an attempt to organize that service with the behavior subject that you would have had otherwise, right? And it's intentionally small because, like, I don't want to bring the whole library to get some of the little benefits that I can all write myself. But the benefit of bringing a library like Component Store, it's first of all, it's really small, right? And I had this. It's 2.2 KB before gzipping. It's under 1K gzip. So it's super tiny, but it would help you organize your service with behavior subjects if you do have those. It will try to separate things like what's the state, what are the actual effects, and separating those effects out would bring something that I saw many times with custom implementations of service with a subject, or basically, hey, I just have one of mine, and that was the handling of the race conditions, right? Those even if those services are made to be push based, there's still this race condition. The push based would be, they have a property that's exposed, and that's an observable saying, hey, this is the values. And if you're consuming that service, you'll just be listening or reading from that property, right? But the methods were still calling, HTTP client and then pushing that value into that observable. So that was still a possibility for race conditions. And this is where, organizing it under mini effects in a way would really help with those race conditions. And again, this is the things that you don't test typically for, right? Like you don't test race conditions in your service. I don't, right? So this just brings in that thing that like, oh, now I have to choose a flattening operator. Okay, if I have another click, how do I handle it, right? So those are the things that trying to help you, the user, the developer, organize those services with behavior subject in a kind of more ergonomic, more organized way, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that even if you are familiar with RxJS in general, it, like I said, we provide an API where it'll, provide those creative observable stream for you, and then you can still build on top of that, without the library like getting in your way. Like, we're not hiding any of the RxJS operators or anything like that from you. It's, like I said, more or less exposing something that you can just use pretty straightforward.
100%, yeah. So getting back to this component store versus the store, right? Like, why would we choose one or another, or maybe none of them, or maybe both of them? In Firebase, we are using both of them right now. And I think there are benefits of using both of them on the larger applications. But then again, the question, I listed the number of questions here. If somebody has any suggestions for other questions that might go into the decision which one to use, please let me or Brandon know, and we'll gladly adjust these and introduce those suggestions as well. I mean, we have the docs, but the docs are just basically some of our ideas. If there are community ideas, we would gladly incorporate those as well. So don't be afraid. This is not something like a rule that's that's set in stone. This is some of the ideas, and some of the ideas that we thought about was, hey, what's the size of application? Like, this is the first question that comes in, and how many components? Like, what's the sizes? How many components this application has? If the component has like 20 components, maybe you don't need any extra libraries, right? Or you're working on some Angular element that's you don't need any state management at all, right? Like, you might be just fine with some of the service thing. If you start to grow, hey, maybe component store can help some of it. If you grow a little bit bigger, maybe, and then you have data that's app wide, because it just becomes bigger. I mean, if with the 20 components, any of your data may be already app wide. All right. So this is one other question.
Yeah, I want to take a quick pause, because I see we got some traffic going on here. Just say thanks to the new subs. I can't see them by name, but Codophobia seems to have brought some folks with them. So shout out to the new subscribers. I'll throw that plug in there real quick. Subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep going with Angular Unfiltered. And this seems like we got some good viewer, or got a lot of viewers here. So definitely thankful for those. And I'll thank you again at the end. And as I see people coming in, we just want to throw that out there.
Nice.
But yeah, go ahead with like I said, compare.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to cut you off.
No. That's all good. That's all good. Is a question. I see that Codophobia asked a question if it's similar to React crooks. I'd say if you're in the Angular world, the better analogy would be similar to a service with a behavior subject, or service with a subject in general. A behavior subject is a little bit easier to understand because it keeps one value for you. Actually, component store uses replace subject continues because it could be lazy, but it's a different story. It doesn't have to have this initial value that behavior subject has to. So it's a little bit lazy. So it's basically like a service with a replace subject of one, in a way. Yeah. So the size of application is one of the factors. The other one is like how interconnected the app is, right? How many components are talking to each other? How many of them are sharing some of the state between them? Or is it just it could be just a tree of very subcomponents that are very separated from the rest of the application, so it's not that much. So again, this is one of the decision factors that could go into the decision. The other one that was was also interesting because the depth of the component tree, like if it's shallow, maybe just having, a global state is fine if it's shallow, right? But it's large, but it's shallow. If it's deep as well, maybe there are some pockets in the application that own some of the piece of state and not sharing anywhere outside of it, right? So the depth is one other factor. It basically ties to the next factor that I put is a state ownership. Like, is there a clear separation? It ties to those deep depth of components and interconnection, right? Is there a node that clearly owns some part of state, right? So it would talk to the backends with that, and the rest of the application has nothing to do with that state. So that node in that component tree really owns this, and maybe its children as well, and they can really reshare it. Lifespan is another one. Like, do we need to keep the state for the entire application lifespan, or do we want it to have the state to live only when that component is displayed? And moreover, if we navigate somewhere else and we navigate back, do we want that state to be remembered? And do we want it to bring something that's basically something cached, or do we want to do the fresh new request? So those are the other ones that basically tying into the choice of the library. It's actually even sometimes both are needed again, but which library would take that state management onto itself?
Yeah, I know I've gotten that question many times. Like the question usually surrounds, okay, I have a component that I'm, using NgRx store with. I've implemented, it for that feature. It doesn't necessarily need to know about the rest of the app. There's some state there. Do I need to dispatch an action to clean that up after the component is destroyed? And the answer is, well, it depends. If you need that, that state to be retained, after this component lives on, maybe it's like a wizard or something that you want to bring that state back with, then yeah, you don't need to clean it up there. But more often than not, I've seen it's just where users are more hesitant to leave that state in there because they think it's going to leak memory or it's going to get out of control, and so they would rather have it just do the extra step there to clean up that state that's collected with that particular component. But like I said, in this case of ComponentStore, I guess that's one of the features there, but the lifespan is short, so you can use that as like a decision of which one you want to use in that particular case.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, this was brought up a number of times. I saw like Dan Abramov tweet about things where I think he's expressing that there are the opinion that there's not that many. Well, there's a limited number of things that are truly global, like application wide, maybe, and that there are some states that live at different node levels. If you have too many node levels that are responsible for this, and your child is using like state from 3, 4, 5 levels of those mini component stores, that could be a problematic thing by itself, right? As well. So this is where the global state management must still help. But yeah, you're exactly right. So there's a state ownership question that and lifespan that gets in there as well. The other factor was business requirements, and this was actually interesting because we want to build application that would be easier to refactor and adjust as our business requirements change, right? And that means, hey, we would want to have a clearer separation from those DTOs or network models. Different teams use different terms, and the view models, and maybe even have some client side, like web app models themselves, right? The client side. So those are not the one that from network you might convert once, and then you have a view models for particular components. And in theory, you can still do it just fine with your services. You just have to have that. What do you call that? organizational level to actually do that, right? It's so easy to pass those, once you convert those DTOs to some models and then just push it all the way to templates. And then you have something changing, your API is changing, your business requirements are changing, and that becomes so much more like refactoring all the way. So the state management libraries, both store and ComponentStore, actually help you organize it a little bit better. And again, you could end up pushing those DTOs through all the effects and everything else through selectors all the way. But it just becomes a little bit harder. Or you have one of those steps where you can clear or separate them. Yeah, the lifespan of the app was an interesting one. I think I got that suggestion from some of the community members. It was an interesting one as well. Do I want my app, like how long do I need to support my application? Is it we're building application
forever? No, just kidding. Just kidding.
No, but some would be for very, very long term, right? Some are short lived. Some there's a consulting company got an order, they build it, and they probably may not support it for a long time, and business requirements are not changing, so you're good. You don't need to do anything with that. But in general, like for example, applications such as bringing it back Firebase Console, right? I mean, we've rewritten this thing already multiple times, parts of it or the whole thing.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, Gmail's been around for what? I don't know, 10, 15 years? I don't remember.
yeah, at least 15. What is this? Yeah, at least 15 years, I think.
Yeah. And Gmail's been rewritten from scratch almost like 4 times. So at some point you rewrite pieces, and then sometimes you rewrite. And so this is what's interesting part. If you're still betting like on Angular for long term, which I think where like people are less eager to jump from one framework to another because the leading frameworks right now, be it Angular, React, Vue, not sure about Svelte if it's stable, like if it's established as a stable one yet, or it's in the process of. They might be for a long run. So we don't expect these frameworks change like a knockout, boom, Angular, like something like quickly like that. And moreover, even the Angular now, Ivy, for the way I see it, Ivy is we migrated to the brand new framework again, but unlike the previous time, we're not asked, like developers are not asked to migrate it by ourselves, which takes us, we've been in process for migrating from AngularJS for now 3 years, and we're still in the process. So this one, they migrated everybody for us on the brand new framework. So this is how I see Ivy. And thanks a lot for the Angular team for that. But I think, or I assume this is the way we'll go forward with all of these frameworks, that they'll be for a long run. So the lifespan of the app also starts to matter more, right? So I don't see that you'll be rewriting for next framework. You'll be most likely trying to support for a long time.
Yeah, and if you try, I guess the other side of that is I always use the to-do app as I use the to-do app as just like a representation of a prototype. You just want to crank something out quick. Do you really want to bring in NgRx for a to-do app that you're just maybe going to throw away if you're just learning how to do it? But if you're trying to build something small and you're just trying to get ramped up quickly, then a prototype, I think ComponentStore fits better into that model where you don't have a lot of services, you don't have a lot of data yet. You just kind of want to get some state management off the ground. It works good
Definitely.
there.
Yeah, and then also one of the backend APIs I think also matters, because this one came up with from other community members, like, hey, I want to use a poll client and GraphQL. Do I need any of these? Like, why would I use any of these? And the answer is like, hey, if you're happy with the whole Apollo, how it manages your state, and you're happy and you don't see the need, I mean, don't try to look for the need. If your problems are being solved already, don't try to come up with the solutions that don't solve problems, right? Solutions should be solving problems, and we shouldn't be using solutions to find the problems to solve, I guess. So maybe you don't need any of them, right? Or if you know, like we don't have that luxury. We don't control, for example, our backend APIs, and moreover, we don't even control some of the backends because some team moved on to something else, or the other team's deprecating their server, and we need to talk to a different server now. And our app has to handle all of that, right? It's because we still need to serve users with similar even data, right? Even the UI might not change much, but the backend, so we talk to change, or what they're using is changing. So we need to have a clearer separation as well, how we talk to the backends, how we aggregate data, how we collect data, basically syncing this data, which is one of the biggest problems that state management solve anyway, right? So that's why I put a backend API there as well. If there are other factors to this, there'll be, you know, send in the suggestions. We'll try to add them, right? If you see those, yeah. So
definitely want to continue to answer those like commonly asked questions, like I said, about when to use this. And I think the opportunity is there for a component store that we didn't have, or that we didn't take advantage of early with like NgRx store, about like when you should use it, or the scenarios, or even like how, or like I said, we've took some of those, I think we've taken a lot of that knowledge that we've gained from writing apps with NgRx store over these years, and kind of poured that into what the direction of like how component store is.
Yeah. And actually using that knowledge that we gained through all these years, I think helped us identify this like benefits and trade-offs as well. Because people, and again, initially, maybe some used NgRx because it was very popular and stuff like that.
Or they use it because they had to. We can throw that in there too. NgRx was forced upon them to use.
And I wanted to identify some of the trade-offs, right, of using the management like this, that management, and those come with indirections. You know, when you call a service, the pool-based service, you call the client, GP client, that gives you an observable. You basically assign that from that method return, right? And you're good. You're that's it. No indirections. Straightforward. Very simple. And if it's like async validation, that's what I want. I don't want anything else. Right? Most likely. I don't want anything else. It's very direct, very easy to debug. I can go through the code, very easy to. But then indirections bring some of the costs, right? And well, the first cost is this push-based architecture indirection. So you call methods as a signals, and you listen for other properties. So this is indirection. It's not directly anymore. It has its cost, right? It's a little bit harder to debug this stuff, and it has benefits. So if you feel that the benefits outweigh the cost, you should use it, right? The benefit of this that I put in here, and again, I linked to Thomas Brotherson's article, as you noticed, actually.
Yep. During right you see that underlying link there. That's shout out to Thomas Burleson. He wrote that. It's probably been a couple of years now. That push-based architecture article, and did a great NgConf talk about it.
Yeah. And why I brought it there, because I didn't want to go into details of it. It's because I think Thomas gets it very good in there. I just quickly wanted to say that we no longer, the developer no longer needs to worry what's changing the state. So if you have that property and you read, all you care is that thing changes, for example. You could send your signals, and the typical example I provide is, those cart icons with the numbers, how many items you have in the cart. Like if it's all you care about, like my cart item component could care only about that. It doesn't care what's adding, how do you add from where, and all that stuff. All it cares is that that item count changes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is, you can just listen to that property or listen to that subscription, basically listen to the observable, subscribe it, and be done with it. Yes, initially you might say, hey, fetch that because I would need that data, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it uses that fetch, but then from there on, it doesn't care what's changing it, all right? And that's the whole point of that state management, is now you can have that interaction. And then global store brings another level of indirection, which is those actions, right? So action is an extra layer of indirection, and you might benefit from it, you might not benefit from it. And again, there are multiple ways to look at it. Dispatching an action might change and trigger multiple effects, multiple reducers throughout, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is a great thing if you're trying to scale things, or hey, my page opened, I don't care what needs to be done. I just have my data that I want to listen to, but I don't care which things needs to be triggered. And you can have an effect, get the products, get the ratings for the products, get something else. Like different effects are firing at the same time, and the component doesn't care what's being done for it. All it cares about that the data, that it notified the system that it's there, and then it's listening for the values that are coming in through the selector that was given to it. So that's another level of indirection. And however, if you just need to call one thing only, right? Like you only need to trigger one effect, then it becomes a little bit costlier to that. Like it's one of those trade-offs, right? Or do you want to see the entire state in your, the entire again, shared global state in your DevTools, right? Because you have to benefit from that. But I won't just do it just for that, right? That's a helper to look into the problems you're trying to solve. But the scalability is quite different. And for example, one of the features that we are using in ComponentStore, we definitely, at least I started to appreciate some of the things that the global store brings that sometimes we're taking for granted. Because some of the things are a little bit harder to orchestrate, especially if you have a few of the component stores at different levels. So those are like, I could have just had that. But now I need to do a little bit more, be a little bit more careful with the component stores.
I'm just waiting for some Angular developer tools that will integrate in with where you can see the component store at your different levels in the tree. I'm just throwing it out there. I'm just throwing it out there. They said they're going to give us some dev tools at some point. So
not going to happen.
Let's wait and see.
Hey, unless
I'm talking about the Angular. I'm talking about the Angular dev tools. They mentioned that in the roadmap. Maybe we can get some information plugged in there.
Yeah, that one providing good performance measurements and things like that. Data testing it internally. Yeah, it is a good tool. Minko worked really hard on that one. Anyhow, no spoilers. We'll see it when they release it.
Yep.
So basically those two levels of indirection. One level is this push base, second is actions, and you have to evaluate yourself, like which ones do you care about, where are your benefits outweigh the trade-offs, and all of that. Like, I think it's important, and I try to put it out because I kept explaining some of these things, and I actually found this nice section that we can put it out, and I'm glad that you guys also went over it and basically agreed on this, I guess.
Yep.
We're going to go over state ownership, which is also kind of important, the file structure. And again,
I see how you make sure to enforce about the multiple files in NgRx store versus the component store single file. Everybody likes single file. We want single file component, single file stores, single file.
I was actually looking at it a different way. NgRx store, because it can split out in very easily into multiple things, scalability becomes a big factor. If my component store grows past like 300-400 lines of code, which it can easily do very fast if you're trying to jam a lot of state into it, it can grow really, really big. And now you have to split it out. And now you have to split it out in a different component store that doesn't depend on reusing some of the data from the, okay, it becomes a little bit more complicated, because in a component store, you really have to identify which component store owns which data, and the other ones shouldn't be restoring it. That's the key there, right? They could use some of the selectors from the previous one, but you still have to, you want to have those ownership of state to be really, really, really clear. So the scalability, this is where it starts to differ, right? That's why NgRx store is more scalable. Right?
Okay, yeah, that was definitely a different thought than what I saw when I saw the diagram there. So yeah, definitely good expanding on that.
Yeah. Yeah, so those are the things that we put into this comparison. One thing that I'm working on the usages part, and one of the first thing that we want to showcase in there is the local store, like a local UI component state. So this is something that's basically owned within the component. And you might even not have any network requests and stuff like that. It just basically owns, and it talks to its parents with the inputs and outputs. And the first thing that I built for this was just trying to experiment is the Paginator. And I'll open it here. And zoom it
this is the Paginator from Material.
Yeah, so this is the similar Paginator that we have, Angular Material. So we have this component library. I just want to pick one component that I can, I thought it would be very simple. Actually, is not.
You say you picked the way to pick a simple example, but you picked the Paginator. I'm like, okay.
But I mean, it's simple, right? In a nutshell, like what does it have? It's like have a few buttons and have items per page. So it has a few things that it does. But then next page, right? You can go next page. So it doesn't do anything. It interacts with the parent components, notifying like what page changed, and we'll see that in a second. But basically, it takes the length of how many items you have in general. What's the default page size? Here is like 10 is default one. And then it takes page size options, which is like 5, 10, 25. So basically, and then it does all for you. You change pages. It meets those events that, hey, something changed. You're now looking at a different range and stuff like that. We'll get into the second. So it's simple. And then, and then I don't want to add it. I want to see the sources to GitHub. Here you go. GitHub. Let me zoom out a little bit. Oops, don't need to print.
We don't want to print.
No printing. I'll just zoom it in. So I'll just go Paginator. There you go. Paginator. And you can see it's fairly large, actually. It's almost 360 lines of code. Like some of them is like the interfaces and stuff like that, the options that it takes and stuff like that. And then the implementation itself, so almost 300 lines of code, right? And it has quite a few things, when you set it, setters and getters, and when you set, you do things and mark for checks and things like that. So it has, its number of inputs, and it does a lot of things on those inputs, some defaults in the constructor, reassigning and comparison, and a bunch of other stuff. It has those next page, previous page, first page, last page, because it actually has a little bit more like this one, like first, last page and stuff like that. So it can go onto this. It has those functions to check if there's a previous, or has a next, or get the number of pages, and change page size, internal functions. It has other things that update display settings, calculations, and emit things. So it has a number of logic, and a lot of it is done through basically calling other methods. So you do go to the first page, you do something, you change, you call something else, like all that stuff. I wanted to have a more reactive state for this one. So what I did is I basically, this is the page event, by the way, I'll just log it here. I created this paginator and re-implemented. It's almost like identical functionality wise. So it's it's almost identical, let's say, the way.
Yeah. So you're just you using basically you're using ComponentStore as like the backbone for the like
Exactly.
the managing the state of this
Mm-hmm.
manage the state of the paginator. Yeah, I had said this before, but I can't quite wrap words around it yet. But I have a similar idea of how this could be applied to like forms or like
Mm-hmm.
forms using this like as a backbone for managing state within forms to give you some reactive APIs there. Uh,
Yeah, and we had
and
the
being able
suggestion
to
from
easily
Zach.
manage that. Yeah, Zach said his, if I can scroll back up here, see if I can find it. Uh, I mentioned this. I said this in the chat. I haven't been able to
Oh, you put it.
articulate it
Okay.
yet. And then Zach followed up with immediately where his brain was going. And I know Zach has done a lot with reactive forms. So let's see if he uses ComponentStore to tries to, put something together. We'll see. We'll see where it goes. I'm just saying that the idea that like the example here, like you have here, it was similar to something I would have been at least been trying to think about for a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this, yeah, and I have my opinions on the form control as well. Uh, Sometimes, if you're creating a simple component, maybe have a few form controls just good enough.
Mm-hmm.
You tie it to the input; those are still reactive, and they hold the state. So it's like, yeah, maybe it's all right, right? And so if you're doing things like that, you could use ComponentStore, or you can just use form controls, which could be a little bit easier tied with the. It depends, right? This one doesn't have form controls, so this one has buttons, and well,
Mm-hmm.
this one kind of is, right? The selector. Yeah, so see, like here, for example, when we go next page, this one, there you go, like next page, right? So this is the output that we get, which is this page event. And this page event basically has like a page index, which is the current page, which is the new page, right? A previous page index, page size, which is how many items are, and the length in general. So you could be going, and then
Mm-hmm.
every time it changes. But then if you go, 25, it knows exactly. So it recalculates what the current one was supposed to be. It recalculates all of this stuff. So it goes all this and does all of this and outputs this. And then based on this, you can, really either call APIs to get that specific range of data and stuff like that. What's cool about this part is so here I'm using ComponentStore directly in the component.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I wanted to showcase a smaller example where it kind of feasible to do this. This one, I feel like borderlines. But hey, it might work as well. And you can see here, like the set page index. Okay, okay, let me just start with this one. So length, right? This is how many in general we have. And I'm putting this value and I'm pushing this to the ComponentStore directly, right? So I'm just saying, hey, whatever state was before, just spread that state. And the new value would be this value unless I can do nothing with it, it'll be 0, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I showed this one where I can use the set state where ComponentStore is part of my component because, I don't need to do any callbacks for this.
Yeah, as
And I'm
opposed
using
to
it a single time
extending.
only. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm saying
Yeah.
as opposed to like extending it within a service and then injecting that service into your
Mm-hmm.
component, you're just using ComponentStore as a custom provider directly there.
Yeah. And you won't be able to use set state if you're extending it with a custom business logic type of
Mm-hmm.
service. And again, I'll show you in a sec. But then even you see things like set page index, I actually put it as an updater. So updater is almost like set state, but it takes not only the state, but the value that would be passed into this set
Mm-hmm.
page index. And then I'm basing it off there. So this is really the real how I change the state. So how I put it outside in the updater. And the reason I did it, because if I'm reusing it multiple times in my component, I don't want to write this every time, right? Or set state every time. I want to reuse it. And here I do reuse it. So once it's somewhere else is used, and it's also used in this input. And again, this, it's fairly straightforward. It works. So similar idea is this behind page size, and page size option is actually doing something. It's actually an interesting example here. Page size, I was looking through this business logic that they had. So they had a function for it that was trying to make the page size option better. And the better, it means it needed to be, when you're getting passing this array of values, it first of all wanted it to be unique, and it also includes this page size that's default one. So if you didn't pass even like 10 here, for example, but 10 is your default, you would still include it as a list. So that was interesting. So we needed to do that. See that here, page state. But also you needed to sort it from lowest number to the largest number. So all of that, the updater can do just fine. Like it'll set state, right? So I have to do it only once, and then I can call multiple times if it's called in multiple places, and it would do the same thing, an organized way. So we touched a little bit on the updaters.
I guess one thing to just note there, you still get the entire state when you get the entire state when you use the callback for a set state, right? And with the updater.
Yeah, definitely. I'm getting the entire state. I could do something else, but here I do get the whole state. Yes. And I need to return the whole state as well. I just need to, and in an immutable way. I need to return the whole state again, it's just in an immutable way, and I just need to change whatever I need to change. So for example, here I'm not touching anything else, so I'm spreading everything else before, and I'm just changing this page index in this updater, for example. Selectors were a nice thing. So this is where I'm starting to selecting things based on what we already have in the component store, right? So this is how we try to make sense and try to make things reactive, right? Based on what we have in the component store. And this one, I'm using this state. I'm destructuring it right away. So out of state, I need a page index and I need the page size, for example. And I do some logic to compare it. And this is basically an observable Boolean at this point, right? I need to get a number of pages as well. Like I have some logic to select that. I need to select has next page, right? So for example, this is used here, right? If I'm on the page 1, I cannot go back. Or if I'm on the next page, I can go back, but right. So this is what this one's used for. First page, right? So this is what those are used for. So next, previous, range label. That was an interesting one. This label here, like I want it to react. And I don't want to recreate it every time. I don't want to call methods that would update the range label. I want it to react based on the info that it has, and it has enough information. It needs like what the current page you're on, what's the page sizes, right, which is like 25, and how many, what's the length in general, and it would do something, and then basically return me this string. Like I don't want to do it by myself every time. I just want to have a value observable that just gives me that. And moreover, then I have this view model, which I select based on my state, my previous next range, and aggregating in a single item.
This looks like familiar. This looks like familiar territory to me when you got this. Looks like a selector to me, which I think is nice.
It is a selector, yes, exactly. This is like a selector in the global store. So it's just like a final one. This is the actual view model, and I used their template. I copied it pretty much as it is, except I sync once this view model, and everywhere else, if we'll search for it, VM dot. So I'm using those values already straight up without any async or anything like that.
Yeah,
so
I think that's a pretty common pattern that's being used is to kind of wrap everything up in a view model, and then you used async pipe with that, and then just in the template, the rest of the way in the template, you just use the view model reference.
Yep. Yeah, that's Deborah Crowder was talking about it a number of times, and I think she also kind of promoted this idea quite well. Yeah, and then I in this one I do set the defaults, and again, you see here, there's no callback here. I'm just passing the object, so my object has to match my paginator state interface. So I have to provide whatever it wants to for the default state, and this is I can do it now, or I can do it at a later point, but I have to provide it before I'm trying to update any of the state, right? Because I'm relying on the previous state. I don't want any partials here. I want to be very, very type safe. And again, just like we do with NgRx, we're trying to be as much as type safe as possible. And I think with the global store, we're also already quite type safe, right? And then there's this interesting one here. Like this is an effect, but it doesn't do any network requests. It just orchestrates some of the things that we need to do, maybe using some of the state things. Here, update page index would set the page index to a new one, but it will also emit. So it does have that side effect. It would emit the output. This is emitting out. So it does have the side effect that it encapsulates. But then, unlike, and I'm not trying to bash this code at all. I mean, it's been written like a long time ago, and it doesn't even matter. I mean, I'm not trying to bash. It's here. It's like every time you try to do this, it tries to recalculate, assign local variables to things, and then it does call this function in the end. So you end up calling things. Sometimes I don't want to do that. I just want to react. Change base size.
One thing I do notice in here is that I don't see any subscriptions in here, which I think is a lot. As a lot of Angular developers using RxJS, we try to minimize subscriptions and subscribers because of memory leaks and I forgot to unsubscribe from that thing. So that you can do that is nice also.
That's a fantastic point you're bringing. Actually, there's 0 subscribes. There's 0 take until. There is no unsubscribes. There is no whatever, either in here or in the template or in the paginator. Nothing. No one take until, nothing. It's just pure as it is. So and again, those are some effects that do other things like change. It's actually interesting point I want to bring, like first page, previous page, last page. And so those are the triggers, basically. Those are from the template perspective. And again, I almost didn't have to even change those functions. This is an interesting one because I'm calling it as a function, this first page, right? Well, in fact, it's here. You can find it. Oops, I will find it this way. It's an effect. So I'm just using it as a trigger to do something, right? So it's basically a void. And for me, that decreased the size like in a good chunk, but it also made it 100% fully reactive. Things are reacting because something changed. And when you change things, you only want to think what you want to change and not, I'm in the next page. I also need to redo my label now. So I have to call that method to redo the label as well. Like you don't want to do that. You want label that you're reacting based on the inputs that it gets, right? And that's pretty much it. And then because it was borderlining my comfortable level of the size of the component, where you have the component store part of it, I also redid this one quickly as a separate store. And that actually led me to some other discoveries, which is also interesting. So here's my component when I have my Paginator store.
This looks even cleaner than the other one.
That's it. Look at this. What I have inputs. They are sending that to the Paginator store. Index, length, size, whatever. I have my output. And what am I doing? In my output, here's my page. I'm in a constructor subscribing to this one. And then just emitting it. That's it. I could, in theory, mark this just as an output. It's a little bit, it's an observable, but it's like an emitter. It's like a little bit trickier, but from readability perspective. But this is it. And by the way, I don't need to unsubscribe also because my page gets unsubscribed automatically. But that's it, right? I'm listening for value.
Frosty in the chat said he doesn't like any of this. He says, write dirtier code, please. He doesn't want this. He doesn't like this clean code you're writing here. He wants it messy and subscribes and no unsubscribes. And he wants all the magic back.
Exactly. But look at this one. The paginator exposes two push-based values now via my model that I need. By the way, I don't need like some of the things like the length in my view model. It just needs some of the things. And I'm exposing the page. That's it. That's two things that I'm exposing. And page, I'm re-pushing right away through the output. Inputs, I just pass the inputs to the store and like figure it out, right? I don't want to do it in a component. In the component, I want to style, I want to put a template, I want to bind that logic, and I'll be done with this, right? And I'm also setting some of the defaults here. I could have done that in the Paginator store, but it's not up to Paginator which defaults this component wants. So this is why it's there, although it's quite tight. And now look at those methods. Change page sizes. This one. I'm just passing it back to the components, to the Paginator store. Next page, just passing it along. That's it. So I'm passing. It's if you're familiar with NgRx, this is a similar idea that's promoted. We take the inputs out and then basically push them into like as actions, right? For example, we just batch actions and we select things. This is very much the same thing. We're selecting things through this VM and Paginator. We push things through these method calls. And again, this is updater underneath. This is updater underneath. And we don't have to know actually it's updater or an effect. From API perspective, we use this paginator in this component. We don't know is it an effect or is it an updater? We'll let the store decide what we want to do.
I think all my users of facades are like jumping for joy. They're like, yes, facades, great. That's what we have. We have reactive, or we have another way to create reactive facades now. Or continue creating them, I could say.
And this one is very similar to what we had the previous one where it was part of it, except for now we cannot set state directly because it's updater. And again, updaters are describing how things are changing. Selectors are describing how we select. And effects tell us how we orchestrate. So this is the hows, right? And then they get the data and they'll know how to deal with this data, how to react to this data. So this is like a fantastic thing, I find. And again, most of it was almost identical to what we had in the previous one, except for page. This one got a little bit more interesting because I was tracking the page index. Because when we do this thing, this is this one, right? So we want the current index in the previous one, right? So we want the current one and the previous one. And storing previous one felt wrong for me because it's a reactive, right? Whenever we change, we know what the previous one was. And this is what pairwise does, right? So we want to have a page index, but we want to know a previous one as well. So this is what we do. And then this is for this page thing. And then we also need, so we're combining this with a select. We're combining this observable, which is those two pages. And then we're combining with this page size and length, which is interesting, right? Because we need those values too. What's interesting, though, is when we navigate or change somewhere, we could be actually changing multiple things at the same time. Let me show you this. And I'll save this. And this is where it's cool trick that we have. By the way, this is how we aggregate this data, right? So we just basically pull it previous and current from this pairwise. We pull this page size and length from this selector. Super.
Can you show like the slight difference in there, how you're extending the component store versus the first one where you were just using it directly?
Yeah, here. That's pretty much it. Yeah.
Yeah, we're just
extending it and I'm using exactly the same state. Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, but what's interesting, because we're combining different observable values, what it looks like, right? Because this is an observable, this is an observable. We're combining two observable values. Some things might change at the same time. Like, for example, here, see like two things fire, right? And this is how we combine latest underneath works, right? So when you change, one value, you'll refire, even though we're changing the other one, you'll refire the other one right after this as well, right? So we could run into the situation where it refires multiple times. But this is where we use this cool trick with this selector. It has the last argument is called debounce. And what it does, it basically puts this output onto the next microtask. So it lets everything synchronous finish, and right after everything synchronous finish, it's literally the next microtask that will aggregate the data. So it lets the state settle. Okay, you change pay this. Okay, I'll let you do that. You change pay size. Awesome. Now you all good. All synchronous changes done. Okay, well, let's combine them together. And this is the operator that's the only file that we have separate from the component store. It's a debounce sync operator. It's internal to the component store, but if you really want to use it somewhere outside, we don't plan to export it. But if you do want to use it in some of your other logic anywhere, actually Nicholas Jameson has it as part of this.
Let me guess, he's already published it as a separate separate thing for people to use.
Yeah, and this is when I was discussing him with some of the strategies how to debounce things. We found a good way to debounce it, but then it was good and very efficient. But he's like, you can see this in his eyes. Like, I know just one way how to make it even more efficient than it is. So he published it basically overnight. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to be using it. He's like, okay, sure. So I copied it into the component store and with all the credits given to him for actually creating it. Yeah. So these debounce is so awesome then. Now you have this, and I actually initially wanted to make it the default behavior when you're combining, but it becomes a little bit less predictable sometimes. Because it still outputs everything in the next microtask. It does all the things before the change detection runs, so there's no problem with that. It's actually more performant way to do things because first of all, it executes faster because it's not part of the main one, and it doesn't have to execute this code twice. So this is also where performance gains are. But I put it as a debounce false by default because it could be some surprising things during the code execution.
In some cases, it was a little too efficient in how it cached the value, or when you were expecting the value, when you're expecting the value to come back, but you didn't get one at that time because you had to combine things in a different way. So
yeah, especially if you use like latest from, right? This is where example we discussed with you that we found the issue where somebody's trying to reuse this value right away somewhere else and it didn't fire yet. So yeah, that was some of the things that we wanted, to but now it's it just works as you want and as expected, and it's immediate before change detection, so it doesn't slow down in rendering. It's actually a more performant way. But it is harder to test a little bit because you need to do like a flash microtasks kind of things in your test.
Okay, maybe that's something. I guess maybe we can provide some test helpers there, but we'll see. I'm pretty sure we'll get some feedback there about that. So looks, like I said, it looks great. That was a good example. I'm pretty sure you're probably going to add this example to the docs at some point or something close to it. As far as, so the question is immediately going to come up, and I believe Jan Nicholas already asked this question, is how is ComponentStore different from Akita? Or how is it different from RX Angular state? Because I think the approach, at least specifically with RX Angular state, we took different approaches to how we were like managing this. And like I said, this isn't putting one versus the other, but we do want to at least talk about like how the things differ in how they're implemented.
Yeah, exactly. So Akita is still geared towards the global state management. So Akita would be a better comparison with the global store, right?
Right.
So although
But I bet you somebody's going to write like some connector to the Redux Dev Tools for ComponentStore or something like that.
It will be really hard because it's the state is not in one place. You now need to
like more of like a read only, not necessarily that you can push back to it, but maybe read from it to see what's currently there.
I'm thinking that Nicholas Jameson, RxJS DevTools that he's working on, might actually provide a better value there because this is basically RxJS underneath. And actually, that's an interesting point because we are using RxJS underneath, but we allow you to connect with the components or Angular's imperative things. There's no reactive input yet. So we set the page or other things like here, right? We call this one. We call it with the regular value underneath. We're using observable, and it's like it's a nice connector between imperative and reactive, by the way. So that's a good point that you brought up as well. So, but then so Akita, more global. This one has a little bit different tasks than both of them. Rx Angular State. You're right about that one. So that one is interesting one. And I actually, it came up a lot. I kind of try to explain that my goal for the component store was to really, for it to be used as this example, as the Paginator Store. So Paginator Store, if you think about it this way, it extends Component Store. Component Store provides you the tools, the updater, the selector. Paginator Store wraps it with the business logic. So I have an updater from Component Store, but here I describe how things. So this one, I really wanted to have a separate logic for this, for business logic, right? So Paginator, and this is how I foresee most of the time Component Store be used, is extended with another store that has this business logic that it brings. So it's completely separated from component. Components stays simple, read and pass along to it. So this is my goal for this. This is one of the objectives, I guess. And this guided the whole design of it. Like all the selects, updaters, and effects, they describe the how. And I want it to be separate. I want it to be easily testable. I want it to be, there. Rx Angular State, I think one of the things I can pull actually some of that. I think one of the things they were trying to say is that they foresee mostly their state to be used inside a component, and I think that was driving some of the decisions in terms of their APIs and usages as well. And again, I'm sure like Michael Huck, can talk a lot more about it. I don't know any not much about the Rx Angular. I didn't quite use it, but what I want to see, I went to the docs. I wanted to compare how exactly we do things differently, how we do things the same way, for example. And this is one of the examples that they have, which was migrating to Rx State from a behavior subject. And I wanted to see how things they would be implemented there. One interesting thing is that our effect. Okay, so this is a click. So this is a checklist. This is a checklist. Basically, you push a number of things into it from somewhere else. It could be you push the ID through it, and then you get the checklist, which calls the API to get things, and then we obviously have this fake one that returns some of the checklist and items within the checklist. So this is a checklist. The name of the checklist. It has some tasks. Like this, an array of tasks. So compare state, and we're basically done, right? So it's a simple API, I guess, right? And if we look at the template here, it's again very straightforward. We get this name, which is this checklist number 1, right? And we basically iterate over these tasks here, and we put them. So it's almost like a to-do checklist, I guess. And here we see his click. We can handle this click and do something with this. So in the Rx Angular world, the final solution changed a little bit the template. So for click, this click. So this is the previous one, the template, right, with the answer task. Let me zoom it in a little bit. Just calling the method, right? So what it turned out to be at the end is they expose, for example, answer subject,
Okay.
and they push it into the subject. So that's one of the changes, because we keep using it as a
It's like a method.
Method, exactly.
Method call, yep.
Yeah, but because this is the file, I'm going to scroll down all the way to the file. So you can go through this example later on if you want to.
Just looking at the example, I will note that one thing. I know that we have one thing that we have in NgRx store that we don't have in ComponentStore is string selectors, and I think that was more. I think the type safety plays more into the constraint of what we wanted there, as far as being able to promote that. Or we stay away from, not stay away from them. We don't promote them using them in NgRx store, and they aren't explicitly included in ComponentStore. So that is at least one difference that I see that this one has, as far as using string selectors for getting data.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I want to get about this after I'll get through this one, right? So this answer that you saw in the template on the click, so they now have to create a subject for it, right? While we handle it through the method. So that's one way to do it, right? And init, right, as well. Init is a subject here, while you saw the example in the paginator, right, which is call a method, right, on the component store. So this is one of the first difference. Second one, so they selectors are close, right? Like if we look at the selectors that we have, oops, let me just close. So yeah, this one is like done, right? So they disappear when you click done. So I just I'll remove that part, and I just get it here so we can see it a little bit closer comparison. So selectors, so it starts wrapping a little bit. But anyhow, this selecting by string selectors, we explicitly don't have the string selectors. We just provide the how to get the thing out of it. So the reason why we don't use so TypeScript is got a lot better in supporting the types. So you can still type check that this property is present as part of the component. I don't know if they do it. They probably do it because it kind of makes sense. However, that kind of breaks in some of the advanced JS compilers, optimizers. They do some of the property renaming things. For example, the one we use at Google, the Closure compiler that's actually open source, is this name would be renamed sometimes by compiler to like M, right? And now it will find all the usages where it's used as a name, right? Like properly named. So it's smart. It's not just looking for a string of name. It's looking for really usages of it, and it would change that to like M, right? So it optimizes the bundle size because you have less characters, less this, and things like name, it won't know how to deal with it. So it'll rename the actual state, and then name will stay. So it won't be able to match this in a production JavaScript bundle. So that's one of the things. And I guess it's also a personal taste. I kind of like things to be a little bit more explicit like this. But again, this is a personal for sure. So you can say it's a little bit more concise this way. I don't see a big problem with this approach. So maybe a little bit more typing, but it's very explicit. And then here was also interesting. So events, we don't have events, right? So our callbacks were this one, get checklist and answer, right? So this is the ones that we call. And both of them are in effect, right? Because we're trying to separate it in other concepts, right? Updaters, they don't do anything other than change the state in an immutable way. Effects used for organizing, orchestrating some of the things. A lot of them are actually triggering some of the side effects, right? So we're trying to encapsulate that side effect into what it actually does. and get checklist, when you click it, it'll take that ID, by the way, is observable, right? But if you click multiple checklists at the same time, they'll all go here. So I guess it should have been not switch map, but it should have been cat map. There you go.
Changing the examples on the fly.
There you go. Changing the example on the fly. I think I was using switch state because I saw the switch state here. Sorry. Yes. So now when
go ahead.
Yeah, now we have those multiple checklists that you super fast and clicking at the same time. They are triggering the callback, right? This API. Oh, this is the get. Sorry, yeah, this is the switch. That's fine. Switch is fine here. We'll need to do this to answer. There you go. Here. There you go. So this is a get checklist. So we're getting the whole checklist with all the items in it. And again, this is an observable. We get that ID. We call the API to get that checklist, and then we would within tap we will set the state to this checklist, right? So if we'll see how it's done in Rx Angular, so this is on. We do this get checklist on the init. So here it's init next. Then this is an event that does this. Then there's a init handler that listens for this init, and it would call the to get the API init handler, and then you have this init handler, and now you need to tie it back to the state, so it connects this init handler. So while we are trying to put it all together in an effect that kind of ties this and describes how this side effect would affect our state, what I see, at least in this example, it's a little bit more spread out. And similar for the answer, right? Answer here is the one that we check mark it or click done. Here we would concat map now, because if there would click multiple things, we want to orchestrate it, right? And then we'll call this answer for this particular checklist. And then once it's done, we'll adjust our set state, right? So we're trying to encapsulate what's exactly happening. While here, tasks answer handler will call the switch map and do this. So answer handler, and then here, even here, so we're connecting. So here, once this one's complete, we're very explicit that we will set the state. Given the previous state, we'll spread that state and update the tasks. Here, updating the task will say connect the tasks to this update handler, but then we would use the ID from this handler in here to update the tasks. And this one, just because it's not spreading the states, so it's not a new. Here we have to be very explicit that this is the state that we are updating. This one shows how we change this particular task, right?
I see. So it's
a little bit spread out. And again, it could be. I'm 100% biased. This is just to get that out of the way. But also, it could be. It depends on how you think about it. Maybe this makes a little bit more sense when you think in a rectangular way. Hey, I'm connecting these tasks using this handler that would return me this ID, and I would update that tasks in here. So for me, I think a little bit differently. I think of, okay, I'm calling this API. I get the result. Okay, what do I do with this result? Well, I have this set state, and I have a state now. So what do I do with the state? Well, I need a new state. I spread the state, and I change the task. So I think maybe I think a little bit differently, but I always wanted to have this a little bit more encapsulated way of dealing with. And again, this is just one example, and I quickly done it because I wanted to compare with something, and that's the comparison that basically came out. That one was
with Michael Lackey's in the chat there, so I'll go ahead and put this up there.
Yes.
I also placed a function there. But like I said, we want people to try out both libraries, and some may, like you said, fit more with other people's mental models of how they work. And he also said they have a set and a get, which are just methods there. So
I was going off the example that I have.
Yeah,
So,
I understand. I'm just saying we want to. He's in the chat, so I'm going to give him a chance to talk about it. So we'll definitely maybe I'm just going to throw it out there. Maybe he'll come on Angular Unfiltered and talk about RX Angular because it's Angular. So let's do it.
yeah.
So yeah, like I said, check out ComponentStore, RX Angular. I think someone asked in the chat if we were going to share the URL to the example for the paginator. I believe we
Yeah.
can do that. So we'll definitely follow up with that. But
Yeah,
I
we
think,
definitely.
yeah. Did you have anything else before we go ahead and wrap up?
Yeah. Also, one of the things that let me just try to find if it's the correct one. Oops, that's not the correct
Okay.
one.
Hey, look at those blocks. Great.
Oh, I was doing some of the, I wanted to see how they compared it size-wise as well. So I noticed that we were small, but again, we were just one file, so that's why we were smaller. Maybe the APIs they have was a little bit better for some usages. The way I think is one way of doing this.
Mhm.
All right.
Hey.
So we had that, and our conversation now goes into the what's.
Yeah.
It
So
does.
we talked about RX Angular. We talked about ComponentStore. I think we covered a good bit there. I would say to definitely check out the docs. We're going to share a link to the example. But let's get some plugs in. You talked about Angular Toronto up front. Is there anything else you want to plug while we got a couple more minutes?
Yes, I definitely want to plug Narwhal. I want to plug Narwhal because, first of all, they are also sponsors of Angular Toronto, which is fantastic. And also, what's interesting is that despite the whole COVID, despite remote, they are still supporting us, which is great because then we can get some time to dedicate to prepare for all of this. So huge thank you for that. And then something that was kind of announced yesterday.
Yes,
Do you want to take that?
big. Yes, Narwhal is sponsoring the NgRx project now. They actually sent out a tweet. I don't know if I'll be able to find it here quickly enough, but they recently started. They're already a sponsor for NgRx Conf for next year or for the upcoming NgRx Conf, but now they're sponsoring NgRx the project. So they've come in at a gold sponsor, which is like the highest tier we have now, which definitely helps the project out with because like I said, we mentioned these in the blog post about like a lot of the time we do free time and unpaid work and all that. So the sponsorship definitely helps with expenses. So just want to give a big shout out to Narwhal. I'll just be full disclosure. I did not prompt them to. I did not say, hey, this time around, I did not say, hey, can y'all start sponsoring us or something? They wanted to do it, and they started it. So definitely appreciate them for sponsoring the project. And be sure to check out. I'll go ahead and bring up their site here because they are sponsoring us. It's for NgRx.
And they're supporting many actually of the community initiatives, many of the meetups, some podcasts. Is really great for them to really be involved with the community and supporting anyone they could. It's really nice.
Angular Toronto, NgRx, NX Cloud gives free tiers to open source projects. Definitely want to get that in too. So if you haven't checked out Narwhal, check that out. Read Victor Safkin's article about Angular as Onion. We think ComponentStore kind of fits into those outer layers of what we can build around Angular. So definitely check that out. We'll go back to the docs here. I think we'll end on the docs page itself. But thanks. I just want to say I thank people during the stream, but thanks to the subscribers. Thanks to all you who have checked out the show today. I'll throw some links up here, ngrx.io. That's the site you're looking at now. If you want to go get some NgRx swag, go to ngrx.threadless.com. We got t-shirts up there. I'll plug Angular Toronto. Definitely check that out. You said you do them every other month. This past month, they had Nicholas Jameson on and Kate, and I can't remember the other
Fabrice Simonit also.
Fabrice, yes,
Fabrice
he was on
from Norway,
also
about schematics.
Yep, check out Angular Toronto, and just if you can subscribe to the channel, follow us on Twitch. I'm going to keep continuing to do these, so all the support helps there. We'll close that out. I'll say, Alex, thank you for coming on. I know this was a long one, but I knew it was going to be long because, like I said, it was all NgRx all the time today. So thanks for
we had this the discussion and like, Brendan, I don't think we'll fit in an hour. We could be talking about it for hours and hours. Yeah. And all the links, how do we want to share the links? I can tweet them, or you can tweet them after the show.
If you'll send me those links, I'll add them to the show notes in the Twitch. And it's going to be streamed out to YouTube, or it's being streamed out to YouTube now. So we'll have those for the people who want to go back and watch it later. Mm-hmm. But yeah, on that note, this is Angular Unfiltered. Like I said, thanks again. Thanks for all you that hung out in the chat and your comments and everything. Keep those coming, and we'll see y'all next time.